I find that a lot of people my age feel a deep level of shame, not just for failing to live up to their dreams, which I talk about in my video The False God of Success, but also for who they used to be. In this episode, I will explain what I felt shame about, and how I was able to let it go and forgive myself. What I feel the most shame for is these violent fantasies I used to have. I feel like I must explain how these fantasies developed before I can explain how I let go of my shame. Growing up, I would always want to go on these adventures. I think the idea was planted in my mind while watching the Rugrats. Tommy would always say, "Let's go on an adventure." When you combine this with the strict and boring upbringing as a Jehovah's Witness, it isn't hard to see why I would gravitate towards this type of escapism. When I was bored in the school or at the Kingdom Hall, I would daydream and go on these adventures. There wasn't usually a coherent storyline to them. I would usually just take whatever interesting thing I had and play with it in my mind. My earliest daydream was inspired by Captain Planet. In it, me and all my family had rings, which lets us turn into the elements of nature. However, as I grew older, the effects of being Jehovah's Witness caused my life to drift further and further from the norm. My adventures started to get more violent. Most of my violent fantasies were cartoonish, like power suits and lightsaber stuff. There's no way I could have ever done any of them. They started when I was in 8th grade, and then they started to fade away when I was a freshman in college. The reason they went away in college is because I realized I could just quit college if I didn't like it. Having this level of control was very freeing. It made staying in college a choice instead of a punishment. I would still have violent fantasies, but they were more like real daydreams rather than plans. After the fantasies went away, I felt ashamed of myself for ever having them. I felt like people could look at me and know I was that type of person. None of this was helped by the fact that I have a rather intense looking face. So how did I learn to let go of the shame I felt? The first thing is that since I never acted on my thoughts, I knew that I didn't need to feel any shame for them. Part of thinking is realizing an idea is bad, which means sometimes you have to think bad things before you realize you shouldn't act on them. The Jehovah's Witnesses thought that thoughts are the same thing as actions. I had to let go of this idea to grow as a person. The second thing was realizing that a majority of my fantasies were a reaction to the environment I was in. If things would have been different, I probably wouldn't have had the violent thoughts to begin with. This is supported by the fact that when my environment changed, the fantasies started to fade away. The third thing is I realized that if I were to meet a teenager who acted in a similar way as I did, I wouldn't be that hard on them. I tend to be my harshest critic, and I have to learn to see myself in an unbiased way. The final thing is that you sometimes have to make mistakes before you can learn. This process can be messy, especially if you don't have any good role models. So to summarize, here are the ways to get over shame for when you were younger. Number 1, don't feel shame for thoughts you didn't act on. Number 2, understand the effect your environment had on when you were younger and try to change it. Number 3, treat your teenager self with the kindness you would afford to a teenager now. Number 4, understand that growing up is a messy process. I still make mistakes that I feel shame for. But it doesn't get to the high levels of self-hatred like it used to be. So this is my episode on letting go of the shame for your younger self. Do you feel any shame for how you acted when you were younger? Or for your thoughts? If you do, did my advice help you at all? I hope it did. See you next week.